Hi guys, welcome to this video. In this video I'm going to add on to my series in relation to looking under the skin of flight simulators and to look at some of the things that maybe we take a little bit for granted. Now this is going to be looking at multi-engine handling. It's pertinent to both FSX and X-plane. I just happen to be demonstrating it in X-plane because for some reason my FSX has decided it can't be bothered to start. Oh, the joys of FSX. I don't know why it's doing it. I haven't changed any add-ons or downloaded any driver changes or anything. It's just decided it can't be bothered dealing with life, so it's given up. But here we are. We're at an airfield called Sandisk, which is Scandinavian, and basically this is it's in Norway. It's a very nice airfield, but it's got a very difficult and very tricky approach to it, and you can see the curvature of the runway, and it's got water either side, and it's a fun place to fly in and out of. But you will see if we do an approach, a ham-fisted attempt at trying to get this thing back on the ground, just how significant it is. And in fact, you'll probably see it before we take off. In fact, if I go around the front, you can see there's your gradient of your parking. Now this is X-plane 10, so it hasn't got any of the nice fancy buildings, but for the purpose of this video that's irrelevant. So let's jump into the cockpit. Now lots of levers, extra levers, so this is going to be multi-engine handling. I've got a video that I've got in mind in terms of doing specifically the blue levers. Now the blue levers, if you're not aware, they relate to props. For 99% of the time they will be left alone by most pilots. I hazard a guess that very few flight simmers actually know what to do with these things, and in fairness, the flight sim world doesn't really punish you if you don't do anything with them either. Likewise, most people just push the mixture fully rich and leave it where it is. But the sims are actually much more detailed than that. So and hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate some of that. The blue levers, as I say, I'm going to do in a separate video because constant speed props are quite a challenge in their own way. Okay, so what we're going to do is have a quick look at a couple of instruments in the cockpit that we would expect to help us out. Now, as I say, I'm going to do something on the constant speed props, and what you'll find is that these instruments here, these four instruments, all relate to your engine performance. Now, if you imagine, ignore the top two, in a simple engine where it's got fixed pitch prop, everything's off the RPM gauge, so all your power settings and everything are off the RPM gauge. In a constant speed unit it's different, so just so you're aware, all these dials will be moving. One of the key things is with multi-engine handling, if you have an engine failure, you may still read manifold pressure and RPM despite an engine having failed because of the prop still turning in the airflow. So you have to look at other indicators. It might be that your fuel flow on one has dropped, for example, or your cylinder head temperature might drop. Generally it won't drop particularly quickly, but there we go. So you might have to look for the secondary indications in addition to one of your legs having to do a lot of work with the rudders. So that's the issue with multi-engine handling, is you have one of these on one side and one of these on the other. Now what that then means is you have the potential for, if this one's broken, this one to do bad things to the aircraft. And what I'll do is I'll do a separate video about engine failures in particular, things like critical engines and whatnot. So there we go. So for the basics, let's have a look at the basics. Here's our airspeed indicator. We've got two little lines here. We're used to the white line for the flaps, flap limiting speeds. We're used to the green line for this is a good airspeed to be at, and the yellow area for this is a not so good airspeed. Normally you'd have your little red VNE. For some reason it's not here. VNE, by the way, is speed never exceed. And then these two lines, and then you also get this little hoofy doofy here. Okay, so we'll just have a talk about these three and then we'll get airborne. The blue line, I'm going to use a different aircraft to this, one with a lot less power, but the blue line is the speed, the demonstrated speed for the best rate of climb if you have a failure of the critical engine. And that's the speed, if you fly, you'll get the best go-uppingness in terms of climbing. I say that some aircraft, if they're fully laden, and hot and high in terms of altitude and air density, with low air density, this blue line, they might not even be able to achieve a climb. It might just be the slowest amount of falling to the ground. But there we go. The red line is very, very important. The red line is the Vmca, which is the speed, minimum control speed in the air. Now that doesn't mean below the red line you're going to fall out of the sky, because for example you could be down at 80 knots, which is below the red line speed, but what it means is that in the event of an engine failure you have no choice but to idle both engines, pull the power right back, because above the red line, below the red line speed, sorry, what it means is that you cannot maintain heading adequately. And if you're on an instrument procedure for any reason, or you're in a restricted area of terrain, for example, oh look where we are here, this is important, particularly with a departure, that if you're below this speed you will not be able to maintain adequate heading. And I think the definition is plus or minus 20 degrees of your initial heading. So there are your two key speeds in terms of on the airspeed indicator. This little hoof-doofer here shows prop sync. Now prop sync, if you won't experience it in the sim, but obviously for the engines, if they're perfectly in tune, all you'll hear is a nice drone. If they're not in tune, you get kind of a noise, and it can be quite nauseating actually in the aircraft. So you have this little thing here where you can put prop sync on, and what it does is it has a measurement of the speed of one prop and the other, and it will synchronize one with the reference prop. So one of these will be the reference, so I don't know, for example the left hand one's the reference, and then it will match that speed to the right hand one, the right hand engine to that reference speed. Now where that's a problem is if you take off and land with prop sync on. Let's say that our reference engine is the left engine in this aircraft. We take off, our left engine fails, and its speed, its engine rotation speed, falls away rapidly. Well, we've got a device that's measuring this, going, well, hang on a minute, I need to match that with this one. So as the RPM on the left drops, the RPM on the right would drop away as well, despite the fact there's nothing wrong with this engine. So that's why you have prop sync turned off at takeoff. Likewise, this is a simple twin engine to aircraft. I'm going to do some engine failure stuff in another video, but in terms of that, you get problems in terms of engine failures with critical engine, so which is the better, which is the worst one to fail, etc. Not going to look at that, we're just looking at the handling aspects for normal multi-engine flying. So one of the things that bugs me is we've got two engines, and there's a lot of people out there who, as I do, fly with two throttles. So there's engine 1 and there's engine 2, look, completely different. And what you see a lot of the time is people go along with their ground handling and they'll just put both engines up to get the aircraft moving, and then that will be it. Now one of the things that in real life you try and avoid doing is riding the brakes on the aircraft, because they get hot, and when they get hot you have two real problems. The first thing is if they get too hot you can cause a fire. The second thing is, though, your ability to stop an aircraft is dependent on the heat of the brakes. Now what I mean by that is when you stop an aircraft, you're rolling along the ground, you're trying to stop it, the energy that you're trying to dissipate is dissipated as heat by the brakes. So if the brakes are already hot, you've got less ability to dissipate heat, so you basically can't stop as well. That's what brake fade is. Brake fade is basically when the brakes get to the point that they're so hot they can't actually dissipate any more heat, any more energy, and they can't slow you down. So the last thing you want to do is an aborted takeoff, not wait for your brakes to cool down and then charge down to the other end of the runway again and have another go, because the chances are if you have a second failure or a second reason why you can't take off, you won't get off and you won't stop and you'll go somewhere off the end, and here it'd be a nice bath for you. So yeah, that's a couple of things to discuss, but one of the things that really bugs me is that we've got two throttles. And I've mentioned the element of trying not to ride our brakes. It's very easy in FSX and X-plane 10 for that matter to ride your brakes, because they don't seem to matter much. Well, unfortunately they do, because in real life that is, because ultimately they're one of the mechanisms for controlling the aircraft. Now there's no wind set up here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the value of this. So I've used both engines, you can see, to break away in terms of the power. Which one do we think is going to give us a better takeoff? Now, without needing to steer anything, if I advance my right throttle and then add a little bit of left pedal, you can see just how manoeuvrable an aircraft is on the ground. but what you'll see is why it's relevant down here, because we're going to do quite a tight turn to turn around. And if you watch what happens with the gauges, you'll see what I'm doing with the engine. Now this is one of the joys of X-plane 10 actually, is contoured runways. And as I say, Sandane as a runway, I thought, my word, X-plane 10's gone a bit overboard with this. X-plane 10 hasn't. If you ever have a look on YouTube at a landing, cockpit viewpoint of landing of here, it's horrendous. It is a massively hilly airfield. If you've ever seen Courchevel in France, you'll know what it looks like. So left rudder, left steering in, bit of burst of power on the right engine, advance both if we want to move forwards and turn at the same time. So you can see both are going up. It's just the right one's more advanced than the left to help me turn. And then as I get to where I want to go, shut off both and line ourselves up. So you can see that one of the things we can do is we can use our differential engine power for manoeuvring on the ground. Okay, not going to demonstrate it, but there's a thing called MCG, Vmca, which is the minimum control speed on the ground. Basically what it means is that if you imagine you're in a 757 with really powerful engines and you happen to be very light that day, these engines kick out a lot of thrust, and you'll see it when pilots initially advance their throttles to sort of 60 odd %, and they'll call that the engines are stable. What that means is that there's no alarm bells, no problems, but more importantly it means that the gauges are matching. The reason that's important is if you imagine advancing 40 odd thousand pounds of thrust or whatever it is, I don't know what a 757 throws out, but it's a lot. But if it's 40 odd thousand pounds of thrust on one side and 0 on the other, you're going to depart stage right somewhere over here very quickly. It's very difficult to demonstrate in the flight simulators because you get quite good control authority, and as a result of that your VMCG minimum control speed on the ground is yeah, basically the only way to demonstrate it is to do the following, is basically to go, oh, minimum control speed on the ground, open one throttle fully, and then try and keep straight with the rudders, and eventually it will have you off the side of the runway. So that's, look at the manoeuvring, you'll notice I'm using the differential power again. Okay, so let's get ourselves off the ground in the most ungracious fashion we can. Let's get airborne and have a look at some of the speeds airborne wise. And over the hill we go, and we're going to accelerate like a rocket down the other side. Look, whoa, look at that for a takeoff run. Okay, so need to trim, get the gear up. Now I'm going to flaps down. Look at that, beautiful, beautiful vista. Okay, so we've got our two speeds, our blue line and our red line. Okay, so what I'm going to do is discuss a couple of bits about the blue line and red line. Blue line, minimum control, blue line is the best rate of climb single engine speed. So if I remove my left engine, I'll pull the throttle back. Okay, so we've now only got one engine. You can see our rate of climb's dropped. The nose wants to drop as well because of the thrust axis in terms of what's going on there. You can also see our airspeed's dropping. Now, yes, I know the gear's up, it's because I'm low and slow. I'll put a bit of power back on the left engine to simulate having feathered it. Now you can see we're doing 110 knots and we're climbing at about 100 feet a minute. You can see why all of a sudden being able to maintain your heading is important. So let's slow ourselves down back towards 100 knots and see if we can generate a climb out of this. Maintain a somewhat steady heading. And see what rate of climb we get at blue line speed. Now we're getting what, 450? So let's pull ourselves back and see actually if that is accurate in terms of our climb speed. So let's get ourselves back to 90 knots, see what's happening. Yeah, you can see the climb speed's starting to actually fall away. It's a little bit wibbly wobbly at the minute. So in fact the climb speed's gone to 0 there, so we're not climbing at all. A little bit disconcerting given all the mountainous terrain around here, but there we go. So that's that element of it. Let's get ourselves powered up fully, get the aircraft happy again, and we'll go and get ourselves into a better position for the next bit. So that's the best single-engined climb speed of the blue line. It's always worth trying to avoid a situation where you're below that line. Quite simply because it's not a very nice place to be. You've got very little in the way of options, because the only option at that point is let's demonstrate a little bit. Let's take our power right back and let our speed bleed away quite quickly. Yes, 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 I know all about the gear warning. Okay. So we're at blue line speed now. Let's get ourselves a little bit nose up so we're a little bit below it. Okay, so if I chop a throttle now, if I keep that attitude, speed bleeds away quickly. The only way to get me airspeed back is to stick my nose down and chase the speed. If you're low to the ground, that's not a good state of affairs to be. So where possible, you try and wherever possible, you try and remain above the blue line speed, or at it. But generally speaking, you'll also find that in twins, some of the best climb speeds are at 100 knots, well, not 100 knots, sorry, at or around the same sorts of speed as the blue line speed. Okay, so that's the first thing. We've discussed minimum control speed on the ground, we've discussed the blue line, now we're going to discuss the red line. What's the red line? The red line, okay, the red line is the speed at which you can maintain adequate directional control in the event of a failure in the air of the critical engine. And basically what it means is that if you're below that speed, you've got so much thrust on one side, it will try and force the aircraft into quite a nasty turn, and into quite a nasty turn to one side or the other, depending on the engine. And as we get back towards the red speed, what I'm going to do is, once we're below the red speed, in fact we'll just pop some flaps out so we're not going to risk a stall. Once we're below the red speed, I'm going to chop an engine, and we'll see if we can maintain heading. So I'm going to put full power on, so both engines got full power, then I'm going to drop one. And now we're trying to maintain ourselves, and we're barely maintaining our heading. And that's the whole issue of the red line, is trying to maintain your heading. And you can see it's fighting me. So if I go faster, I should have less problem. And the key there is that your directional control, your rudder, this bit where I'm waving my feet and flying the aircraft around like a buffoon, your rudder runs out of authority. And that's the issue there, is that once we get to, as we slow down, the actual effectiveness of the rudder becomes massively reduced. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down below the red line speed. I'm going to tell you when the rudder runs out of authority. It's run out there, it's right against the stop. So if I keep slowing down, you'll see the nose should start to yaw to the left. There it goes. And I can't stop that. I've got full right rudder in. I cannot stop that in any way, shape or form. And that's because we're below red line speed. And that's fundamentally what it's about. So as soon as I pick up airspeed, get above red line speed again, and my required rudder input reduces massively. So that's those two lines. One of the things I did mention earlier is that I put a bit of power back on the left engine to simulate having feathered the engine. The reason for that is an aircraft like a light aircraft like this doesn't generally have auto feather, and that means that when you cut an engine thrust-wise, but it's still running and it's still disking, it's got flat. The blades are flat onto the air, you get an awful lot of drag, so you have to feather the engine so that the blades are in line with the air. Shouldn't really turn and mess around like this at red line speed, but it's a flight simulator. Heck, what's the worst that can happen? We stuff into the ground and I look a bit silly. But yeah, going back to feathering engines, I'm going to cover that a bit more in terms of having a look at engine failures. And I'll discuss both jet and prop engine failures, because they're both slightly different. A lot of the stuff I'm talking about here can be used for prop and jets, because it's aerodynamics. It doesn't matter what sort of engine you have. It's just the way that these things fly. So the only thing really left for me to look at is just a very basic flying aid in terms of what would be considered acceptable. For determining an engine failure, I'm just going to creep into the next one of the next couple of videos. For determining an engine failure, the real mantra that pilots use is dead leg, dead engine. So if I fail my left engine, boom, I have to put right rudder in, and that means that my left leg is just hanging limp like a bit of thread, really. That tells me that the left engine is the one that's got no power. Now in a real aircraft, if you're travelling fast enough, you will see actually the engine could be driven by the propeller fast enough at a fast enough speed that the gauges don't show the stark difference that they've got here. The reason they're showing a big difference is because we've got an engine running. It's just throttled back. Okay, so I'm discussing what acceptable handling is. I've got quite a lot of right rudder in, flying at 100 knots, blue line speed, full power on the right engine, yet we're still going down. As I say, sometimes actually what happens is your best climb speed is on the blue line is actually a least falling speed. But there we go. So the next bit we're going to look at really is what the acceptable control criteria are. Now it's generally accepted that you're allowed 5 degrees roll into the live engine, because remember, the live engine, if I let go of the rudders, the live engine is trying to drag us round to the left. So what we can do then is we're obviously using quite a lot of right rudder to counter that yaw to the left, and obviously when we yaw it wants to roll as well, look. So it's kind of a bit of both really. So what we're going to do here is I've got quite a lot of right rudder. Now I can trim the rudder certainly, but my right leg's going to get tired. I also have a bit less control authority because I'm using it to maintain my heading. So what I can do is I can just introduce 5 degrees bank in towards the live engine. And you'll see that means I'm turning ever so slightly right, which means to balance that, to stop my heading change, I'm just going to ease off the rudder a little bit. So I've got 5 degrees bank right, a little bit less rudder, and what happens then is basically I regain some of my rudder authority. I gain some rudder back for me to be able to use to fly the aircraft. Useful little trick. It is accepted that's accepted practice in terms of instrument flying. So yeah, I mean, in terms of aircraft handling, that's pretty much it, guys. There's not much more to concern ourselves at the moment in terms of aircraft handling. In fact, what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to climb up, silence everything. I'm going to climb up and we're going to have a look at whether the prop sync works if I cut one or the other, just to see whether it's simulated, because I've got my prop sync switched somewhere down here. Where's it gone? Actually, I know what I can do. Where's my prop sync? Where's it gone? There we go. Let's turn that bad boy on. So we've got the prop sync on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to chop one of the throttles, and we will have a look at what happens in terms of the engine behaviour. There's the airfield right in front of us. Okay, cool. Let's just trim the aircraft out a little bit so we're not fighting it so much. Okay. Just take my hands off everything, make sure it's happy. Still increasing speed, quite happy with that. Okay, so prop sync. If prop sync is, you can see it's not turning. Not turning means basically that the engines are balanced and coordinated in terms of their harmonics. It means they're turning at exactly the same speed and you shouldn't have any harmonic resonance as a result of it. That's all it really does. It doesn't do a great deal else to the best of my knowledge, but there we go. So what I should be able to do with prop sync on is I should be able to retard one throttle with no difficulty, and if I retard the other one, both engines should decrease. So we'll see if it's simulated. So that's the left one gone. You see there's no change in the right engine. Reintroduce it. That's the right one gone, and there's no change in the other engine. So yeah, prop sync isn't unfortunately modelled in this. Now there's going to be some aircraft where it is. I'm thinking potentially of the likes of sort of Coronados and things like that, so it's worth having a look at the aircraft, and if it's got prop sync, I'm fairly certain some of them will have it modelled. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a dive bomb landing now and see how we get on. If you guys have got any questions, then please feel free to put them into the comments section, and I will do my best to see if I can answer them for you. I can't guarantee everything. In fact, I won't guarantee anything at all. But nonetheless, let's do our dive bomb approach here. Okay, so it's out in the left 9 o'clock, pretty much a beamers now. I need to get track IR set up on this actually. Yes, 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 yes. I know we're slow and low, so let's get some flaps out, gear down. You can see the speed's bleeding off nicely. And what we're going to do is just fly around this headland. See how we get on. Get some more flaps out. There it is, look. Look at that bad boy. Look at that. Beautiful. It's not a textbook approach. I don't know what the textbook approach is for this, but we're certainly a bit slow. However, we're managing that at the minute. We're quite light, so I'm not overly concerned about it. We're going to bring it round to the left, and you'll see the gradient on the airfield any second now as we come round. It is quite horrendous. And as I say, having watched it on YouTube, you can see it on YouTube and you can appreciate it now. It's just basically a humpback hill. Now, one of the things you've got to be careful with is the visual cues that will make you appear to be high when you're not. It's one of the things in terms of human physiology and performance is that a sloping runway, an upslope like that, can make you feel that you're a bit high on approach when in reality you're not. So let's see. The other thing we're going to do is when we flare, of course, it's going to be a very high nose attitude. We just roll ourselves over the top. So hopefully that's been useful, guys. If it has, then please feel free to support me, clicking like, share or subscribe. All three are great. And in the meantime, I shall speak to you guys soon. Take care.